Hello from Philadelphia. Frank here with yet another episode of UFO News Network Sunday. Today coming to you on a Wednesday, covering recent news that has popped up since the last time we did a show here. And it was a real interesting period. Lots of good stuff has come out that will be of interest to you all. And the top story, of course, is the Senate Intelligence Committee wants a UFO report from the Pentagon. So let's get right to it. This story got a lot of mainstream coverage. I know it got out well beyond the usual UFO people because I was asked about it at the office. So that was, of course, very interesting. And this story from Brian Bender, senators want the public to see government's UFO reports. A quote from it from Christopher Mellon, of course, from the To the Stars Academy. It further legitimizes the issue, said Christopher Mellon, a former top intelligence official and Senate staffer who is pressed for more research on the topic. That in itself is extremely important. People can talk about it without fear of embarrassment. He said the potential implications cannot be overstated. Assuming the report is properly prepared and delivered, there is no telling what the impacts could be. Mellon said that could range from revealing an unknown threat or military vulnerability to there have been probes visiting our planet or anything in between. So that is very nice to see, actually, that last part where he begins to raise the possibility that, yes, some of these UFOs are, in fact, extraterrestrial. So we do like that, of course. Obviously, I've been critical of the threat talk, the threat implications. That is always a problem with me. I don't see anything threatening in the otherworldly UFOs, and that has been part of the TTSA message getting out there. Who knows? It may have been just a necessary evil, something that they had to do to get the right people's attention. But be that as it may, that is an exciting quote from Mellon and an exciting development in the Senate. Of course, when this news came out, the chairman of the committee, Marco Rubio, is the individual who seemed to get the most attention. Very high-profile senator, obviously ran for president last time around. But really the driving force behind this is Senator Mark Warner. And I'll get into that in a little bit. Let's get some feedback and some opinions that came out from others. Billy Cox over at Devoid, usually kind of a curmudgeonly, old school reporter type guy, a little bit on the crusty side. Here he sounds almost like a cheerleader, like he's literally giddy with excitement. It is impossible to overstate the magnitude of this heretofore unthinkable directive issued by the Senate last week. It sounds almost what? Too normal, too pro forma, as if the most radical fishing expedition of our lifetime is simply a matter of good bureaucratic housekeeping. Yet here we are, in a place no one could have predicted even a year ago. And that is about right. However, what did happen more than a year ago is the ranking member on the minority side, Democrat Mark Warner from Virginia, has been pushing this UFO issue. He has been contacting the Navy in the past, asking for more information, and finally this week, what he did, he's no question in my mind that he is the driving force behind this particular piece. Here we see in the bill itself some details. Hopefully you can read it. If you're not, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll buzz through some key points. Committee further directs the report to include hang on a sec. We're actually jumped ahead here. Advanced aerial threats. The committee supports the efforts of the Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force at the Office of Naval Intelligence to standardize collection and reporting on unidentified aerial phenomenon. Any links they have to adversarial foreign governments and the threat they pose to U.S. military assets. Committee remains concerned there is no unified comprehensive process within the government for collecting and analyzing intelligence on UAPs despite the potential threat. Committee understands relevant intelligence may be sensitive. Nevertheless, committee finds that the information sharing and coordination across the intelligence community has been inconsistent, lacked attention from senior leaders. Therefore, committee directs the DNI, Director of Naval Intelligence, in consultation with the Secretary of Defense and the heads of such other agencies as the Director and Secretary jointly consider relevant, to submit a report within 180 days of the date of enactment of the Act to the Congressional Intelligence and Armed Services Committees on UAPs, including observed airborne objects that have not been identified. Of course, the devil's always in the details. Here's a little bit more detail about what they're asking for. Detailed analysis of UAP data and intelligence reporting collected or held by the Office of Naval Intelligence. This seems specifically geared towards the Navy here, and no mention specifically of the Air Force. We'll get to some Air Force news up next, but including data and intelligence reporting held by UAP Task Force, detailed analysis of unidentified phenomena, data collected by geospatial, signals intelligence, human intelligence, measurement and signals intelligence, detailed analysis of data from the FBI regarding restricted airspace, detailed description of interagency process for ensuring timely data collection and centralized analysis, identification of an official accountable for the process described in paragraph 4. So we're going to see, it looks like, some of the inner workings of this UAP task force and who's running it, who's in charge over there. So that will be of some interest, of course. Identification of potential aerospace and other threats posed by the UAP phenomenon, identification of incidents or patterns that indicate a potential adversary. Well, identification of incidents or patterns, that is obviously getting towards a real key question regarding UFOs, and that is frequency. How often do these truly otherworldly events happen? And are there any patterns involved? Are there enough of them to discern a pattern at all? So we don't know about that, but that is key information we definitely want to get our hands on. And then number 8, recommendations regarding increased collection of data, enhanced research and development, additional funding, other resources. The report, this is key, shall be submitted in unclassified form. So at least we should be getting something that's unclassified, but may include a classified annex. So we may not get everything, but hopefully we get some stuff here. Now, this is not over until it's over, of course. Anything involving government, it never is. This is a bill. It hasn't been passed. It still has to get through the full Senate, still has to get through the House, and that will take some time. And then we've got another 180 days after it passes. Hopefully, it may not, but after it passes, another 180 days beyond that. So you're not going to be looking at seeing anything until maybe at the earliest late in the first quarter. That would be my suggestion. And there are still some problems and some hurdles to overcome, and I will get to that. Let's go back to the Brian Bender article. Brian did a lengthy interview with Alejandro Rojas last week, where they talked about a number of things related to the bill itself and how the issue's going. But they also talked a lot, and I thought this was very interesting, about win. I mean, what's in it for the individuals who are involved? What is in it for them? Obviously, we know that there is a Mr. Inside, the senator himself, and that is Mark Warner. And we know that there is a Mr. Outside, and that is Christopher Mellon, who was a Senate Intelligence Committee staffer at one point in his career, and now is over at the To the Stars Academy. So you've got your Mr. Inside and your Mr. Outside, but that doesn't mean that this is a done deal, of course. Lots of things can happen. As I mentioned before, this has not gotten through the full Senate and the House. Now, what might happen to create some problems? Well, when Bender and Rojas talked about this, they talked about win. I mean, what's in it for these various individuals? Obviously, we know that Warner is motivated and that Mellon is motivated to get this kind of information out. But there might be some people who are motivated to not get this out. Now, is it possible that a member of the House or a member of the Senate just on their own doesn't want it? That's always possible. Now, politically, I think the UFO subject has gotten to the point now where it's not really a negative. People have basically accepted the fact that, yeah, this is something we should be looking at, and let's get more information out. Let's have some more transparency on this. So I don't think it's a negative, but it's not necessarily a positive either. I don't. There's no great groundswell of people looking to have their vote hinge on whether someone is pro-disclosure or against it. So it's kind of in the middle. I think the general public is kind of neutral on this. It's not going to be looking that people, especially in Virginia, are not going to be looking that closely at, well, Mark Warner is behind disclosure. Let's all vote for him, and he's going to win in a landslide. That's an important point, too, that I want to get to. Mark Warner is up for re-election this fall. It's not a guarantee he's going to be the senator from Virginia come January. So is it possible that if he happens to lose, and he won his last re-election in a very close race, don't know how things are looking for him for this race, but it's always possible that he doesn't win re-election. Does that mean that this entire effort doesn't fall apart at some point, that maybe a stall game takes place within the Pentagon? 180 days, that's not enough time. Give us more time. Let's put more of the information that we give you, more of it should be in the classified annex rather than in the publicly released information. A lot of different things can happen. Is it also possible that maybe someone in the Senate or the House just on their own doesn't like this for whatever reason and wants to get rid of it? Or someone in the Pentagon dislikes it to the point that they go to a friend of theirs who doesn't really care that much one way or another, but they go to a friend of theirs in the House or the Senate and say, get this thing out of here. We don't want to deal with this. All those things, they're possible. And again, things are never over until they're over. So let's... a lot of different opinions, as I've said, have been written about this, and that was reported very, very widely. But I found the work of someone named Adam Kehoe over at Medium, and he looks very closely at the work of Mellon, and does some very good analysis on what he thinks Mellon's up to and how he's approaching all this. In a quote from his most recent article after all this came out, "Given the above experience, how would Mellon approach the problem of influencing government on the perennially charged and toxic topic of UAPs? To start, it makes sense that he would turn to SSCI, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. It is extremely well positioned to investigate the type of reform he is interested in. He also has the advantage of understanding it very well. Secondly, he would already know that the game would most likely not center on distracted senators, but rather on key staff. To that end, he knows that staff are also busy and are challenged to spend time on issues that are not in the political spotlight. Therefore, it would be important to see discussions with sample language to jumpstart the policy process. This is, of course, precisely what he did in May of 2019. He appears to have taken a two-pronged strategy, writing both technical draft language for the Senate and an opinion piece intended for a general audience. I strongly recommend that people start following Adam Kehoe over on Medium. He is the kind of guy who seems to be writing the sort of material on this subject that is nuanced and thinks a little bit deeper on these subjects, and he's somebody well worth keeping in your little portfolio of people to follow on this issue. So that was a really interesting letter. Big news, I gotta say, I love it. Again, it's not over till it's over, but this is where we're at now, and if this does get torpedoed at some point in time, I think that will make the news too, and at least we will know about it. And Republican or Democrat, whichever you are, I think maybe you want to be rooting for or voting for Mark Warner in Virginia. He is Mr. Inside on this at this point. I think there's no question about that. Circling back to the Rojas and Bender interview, Bender did mention the name of a particular staffer that is very much involved in this on that, apparently on the Intelligence Committee. I have to admit I wasn't taking notes, so I forgot the name, but that is an important part of the process, as Kehoe, in fact, pointed out. So good analysis from Kehoe, good work from Alejandro Rojas in terms of getting Brian Bender on the air. Good show there from Billy Cox. Good show all around. Things looking very good. This is very important news, and that is, of course, why we wanted to lead with it. Now, the second story is, of course, if you've been following the show carefully, we've been talking for some time about the relative silence from the Air Force regarding all this. Navy seems to be taking the lead, no question about it. They've got some good information, but I don't think they have the mother lode of information that the Air Force does. Finally, within the last week, a couple things have come out that do at least get our attention. Nothing earth-shattering, but the War Zone was able to FOIA some reports that were obtained from the Air Force Safety Center regarding not what we would consider to be classic UFOs as far as craft that are literally unidentified, as in look in the air, what is that? These are fairly mundane cases where the Air Force pilots will spot an aircraft and they don't know whose aircraft it is, that type of thing, or spot a drone and not know whose drone it is. Those are the types of cases that they were able to FOIA out. So, also it's very similar to the type of information that the War Zone and then also the New York Times in their last article was able to get from the Navy. Sort of ordinary, mundane cases, nothing otherworldly, nothing even potentially ET related. But here's some highlights from this particular article. In May, the War Zone was first to publish details from a number of hazard reports from the Naval Safety Center obtained via the FOIA regarding interactions between that service's aircraft and unknown aerial craft that offered an additional look into what might be happening, why, and how these encounters were or weren't getting reported. We can now share information from 25 similar reports obtained through the FOIA from the Air Force Safety Center. These Air Force reports, as well as the previously disclosed one that the Navy has on file, could easily be among the information that the intelligence community and the Department of Defense might end up compiling for senators to review. Yeah, hopefully they've got a little bit more than that, and that's what comes out in that Senate report, something a little bit more akin to what we've heard regarding the Nimitz case and the Roosevelt case, and not, well, I see a drone or I see an airplane and we're not sure who it is. Hopefully it's more than that. But again, this article is proof positive that even the most mundane types of cases do get reported. So if there's anything a little bit more exciting than that, you gotta figure that's getting reported too. And obviously, those are the reports that we want to see. And also, the in this email chain from Defense Department folks, going back involving Air Force personnel and civilian employees of the Pentagon. This email came out regarding how the Air Force handles these types of reports from Sue. Looks from Sue Guff. Or to Sue Guff, and basically the key paragraph here. Currently, the Air Force is not working any specific guidelines for reporting UAPs. A side note, and off the record, we do have reporting instructions for unauthorized air vehicles, military installation, airspace violation, but that is more in the CUAS realm. That information is provided via OPREPS or SIPR. So here's that OPREP name. Again, that is something we've talked about. Paul Dean has made sort of a cottage industry of ferreting out really interesting UFO cases that were reported through that OPREP channel. Basically, operational report, pretty simple there, and it's sort of a catch-all device for someone to report something that doesn't really fit into any other type of category. It can range from something like a UFO encounter to an instance of sexual harassment, really literally anything and everything that doesn't fit into a sort of a normal channel goes into an OPREP report. And apparently that is what the Air Force is still using. They don't have any kind of formal, specific UFO or they all seem to be using UAP, but I'm going to stick to UFO, any specific UFO channel. So now we move from the very exciting, interesting, important end of the pool to the dirty end of the pool, where we start talking about fake documents that have been floating around again and have been getting probably an undue level of attention. This most recent doc has been floating around out there for some time, but apparently there's some and has been discussed by, among others, Hal Puthoff, who is on record as vouching for its legitimacy, as well as Eric Davis, both saying this document is legit? Well, it was finally figured out which particular document Hal's been talking about for some time. It is this one, and I was able to give it a quick read through when it came out, and the release became available to me. And immediately, what jumped out to me was the last sentence on this particular graphic I've got here. We also believe the Soviets have calculated the U.S. ECM capabilities on a level similar to theirs and are at parity. Of course, the word parity should be the one there, is rather than parity. Now, this is something that I've noticed because I've read a lot of these documents, looked at a lot of them over the years, and you will often find these little jokes, these little almost like insider wink and nods to other people in the intel community, as if to say, yeah, this is a parody, this is a joke, we're kidding around here, this is not a legitimate document. While it's certainly possible that a lot of the misspells and the misuse of that particular word might well just happen, and they do happen, I know that for a fact, that one really stood out to me as a red flag when I first read through it. Now, excuse me, I can tell you at a very high level, misspellings do happen. Over at my website, I've got an article on a meeting that took place in the White House regarding the UFO incident over Washington, D.C. in 1952. Now, in the Truman Library's account of the president's calendar for that particular entry regarding that particular meeting. The word aide is misspelled a couple times. Normally, an aide used as a noun as a person who is an aide or assistant to someone. It is spelled A-I-D-E, and in this particular entry, it is spelled A-I-D, which is more the verb, to aid someone. So it's the wrong word is really is being used there, and that hey, that's an entry in the president's actual calendar, and it's a misspell. So those kind of things do happen, but there are an awful lot of them in there, and and again that misuse of the word parody that is awfully problematic. But a couple of researchers have taken a really deep look at this. They're obviously very well qualified to do that. Paul Dean looked at basically the history cited of different organizations that are mentioned in this particular document, and then Keith Basterfield last night put out his article where he looked more at the provenance of this document. They both again raised that many more red flags. There's literally a sea of red flags regarding this particular document. Paul took the extra step of actually offering $1,000 to prove for anyone to prove that this is a genuine document, and Paul definitely wrote this. I can hear his voice as I read it. So the mention of certain government agencies which didn't even exist in 1961 is far worse. Obviously, earlier in the article, he had talked about some of the misuse of certain words and misspellings, but this is the meat of it. There are a lot of mistakes in this particular document related to organizations and what they were called and when they existed and so on. And he goes through it in great detail. Which didn't exist in 1961 is far worse. The Joint Research and Development Board went out of existence in 1948-49, was replaced by the Research and Development Board, which was then abolished in 1953. We see the Joint Nuclear Energy Intelligence Committee named, yet it was replaced by the Joint Atomic Energy Intelligence Committee in 1948. In fact, both are named, but only the JAEIC existed in 1961 when the document was allegedly authored. Hoaxers should have made up their minds and settled on only the JAEIC. The listing of the CIA's Deputy Director of Operations is impossible, didn't exist until 73. Let's see. The CIA's Foreign Broadcast Information Service didn't exist in 1961 either. It was the Foreign Broadcast Information Division back then, and it was only in 1965 that the FBID transitioned to the FBIS. Los Angeles National Laboratory was was renamed, and there's a mistake regarding that. Some LASL staffers ostensibly use the term National Laboratory on select formal documents. One researcher who would prefer not to be named has seen such records. Still, the use of an incorrect, if otherwise internally grasped term in such an important document seems unlikely. Whatever the situation, the impossible organizational red flags I've highlighted are more than enough to warrant extreme suspicion, if not outright scorn. Finally, the document mentions the hoax MJ12 group, and we all know where that leads. No more discussion on that affair is worth anyone's time, especially mine. So Paul goes through the details on the organizational structures and finds, obviously, a significant number of problems. Now, Keith, on the other hand, took a different tact, and he's focused a little bit more on the original provenance of the doc, how it came out. So, where did the document first surface? It seems that it came to light here, and he's got the quote that I've got. He's actually got the link over at his article over at his website, so you can click on that. On that website, the introduction states, "To our knowledge, this is not only on any web page except this one, originally leaked to Tim Cooper and sent by Bob Wood. Thanks to both. This site, UFOconspiracy.com, provides links to the 4-page document. It also states in 2000, Washington, D.C., OSI sources, according to Rick Doty, verified this document as real, but is a retype of the original." Then an August 2000 email from Doty to Wood referring to a number of documents. In part, it states Document 5, Restricted Data Atomic Energy Act of 1954. This document is authentic, based on a source document contained in a government file. This document was retyped from its original, and you're also starting to see connected to this particular document some really unfortunate names. Obviously, Doty, not a good one at all, and of course Bob Wood with his son Ryan run the Majestic 12 Documents website, and I'm not going to question their integrity on that, but basically they believe pretty much all these fake documents are legitimate, and that it went through those kinds of hands, and I don't think it's impossible that the Wilson Notes documents went through those hands as well, and if they did, that's not good news for the Wilson Notes. Now, again, Doty, or excuse me, not Doty, but Putoff and Davis also vouching for these documents as being legit, and of course, they are heavily involved in the Wilson Notes as well. Again, this should be a real red flag for a lot of folks out there, and of course, very little mention from the pro-doc folks that Rick Doty was in fact employed by Hal Putoff for a number of years. Putoff has confirmed this, vouches for Doty as being a nice guy when questioned about it, doesn't go into much more detail than that. And of course, that nexus in connection with all these fake documents, that is a real problem. But be that as it may, we're not done yet with the fake documents. And finally, we're going to go back to a topic we spent an awful lot of time on here, the Wilson Notes. And before we get into the resurrection of this case, I'm going to talk about a point that Christian Lambright brought up. Now, in the notes, and you can see I've got these different image files kind of cobbled together here. In the lower right, you see the excerpt from the Wilson Notes that Christian Lambright is talking about, where basically Kostelnik's background is sort of laid out by, as a part of the story by Wilson to Eric Davis, who is this guy, Michael Kostelnik. Well, basically, what Christian did was he paired up what was in the notes to Kostelnik's actual resume. So there are some discrepancies, and they are significant. Something odd in the Davis-Wilson documents Christian posted on page 7 is a discussion that mentions Paul Kaminsky and Mike Kostelnik. Kostelnik is described as a brigadier general and as being in Kaminsky's office at Uzdat. Kostelnik is also said to be the SAPCO director and a member and executive secretary of the SAP Oversight Committee. SAP, of course, is a Special Access Project, among a few other things. But according to Kostelnik's Air Force biography, he held he held the above positions from June of 94 through September of 95, then moved to Air Materiel Command in 1997 when Wilson is said to have been talking to these men in Kaminsky's office. Kostelnik was a vice commander at headquarters Air Materiel Command at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. Furthermore, he was not a brigadier general in 97, having already been promoted to major general in late 96. So those are excellent points, obviously backed up by facts. Could they have been Wilson making some mistakes in terms of Kostelnik's actual rank? Could it be that Kostelnik was just visiting Washington and was in the office? It's not entirely clear. I mean, those kinds of things are possible, but there are errors there. There are discrepancies between what the notes state in terms of Kostelnik's resume and in terms of the actual facts. Very important points, and ones well worth making. Not proof, but certainly evidence that there are continuing problems being ferreted out regarding these notes. Now, one individual who doesn't have any problems with the notes whatsoever is UFO Joe Murgia. He is on record as saying the notes are real. He's convinced of it. He's got sources that have told him this. He has categorized those sources. They aren't just anybody. They are former NIDS people. That's Bigelow's National Institute for Discovery Sciences that was folded up back in 2004, but was in existence back during the time that the notes were being put together. And he says those are his sources. He's categorized them, not named them, but categorized them, and that they are telling him that these notes are in fact real. Now, Joe has put together an exhausting to go through, but exhaustive 4-page report over at his website. I do recommend, whatever your opinion is on the notes, to go over and take a look at it. I would especially recommend part 1, which I thought was actually quite excellent, that more closely covers the actual original meeting, which no one questions. It's been confirmed by everybody who took part in it, of the Greer, Mitchell, Miller, and Wilson meeting in the Pentagon back in 97. And that is, of course, something that a lot of people are intrigued by, even if they have problems with the notes. I'm not the only one. I've talked to some other people who are pretty interested in that. They don't necessarily think it's as cut and dried as it was placed back in the day. That does merit some additional follow-up, but still have problems with these notes. Now, Joe did also cover more about some of the research he's done in terms of talking directly to Commander Miller. He did follow up with Commander Miller in an interview. Commander Miller did reiterate one of the questions that I asked him regarding his interest in the Socorro case, which in the notes it expresses that that was one of the things that he asked Wilson to ask this secret committee with this defense contractor about, and he again on record stating that he doesn't have any particular interest in this case. And of course, that's one of the things when these notes came out that I particularly jumped on very, very quickly, because that Socorro case really is not one of it's a really interesting case, but it's not one that I think would necessarily get a lot of people's attention. So when he says that, I have no doubt that he's telling the truth on that, and that would therefore make those documents, in that instance at the very least, a fabrication. The Serpo material, which is unquestionably a hoax, references this summit meeting between extraterrestrials and Air Force members at Holloman Air Force Base. And they list a very specific date, April 24th, 1964. That is the date of the Socorro case. So there's always been an effort in these disinformation efforts to tie little mentions of known UFO cases to this disinformational material. There's also been mentions in the past about the ETs. We know that they come from Zeta Reticuli, which is, of course, was identified as via the Betty Hill star map as the location for these extraterrestrials. That was also mentioned by Bob Lazar. He said that he was told that the Air Force knows they're from Zeta Reticuli line. Of course, that's highly unlikely, I would have to go ahead and say. But Joe, and he asked me some questions, and I followed up with him and gave him what we had regarding some of the stuff that he asked us about. And he did include mentioning them. I don't have any real harsh criticisms here. I just would like to take a moment now to sort of qualify some of the things that he wrote. And let me get to that right now. Stalter has also repeatedly pointed out that in the documents, Wilson talks about Rich and Doug from the new AFIO chapter. Now, that is, of course, true, and of course, I believe that I've identified Rich as being Rich Cohn, who was the founder of that AFIO chapter. It does turn out quite correct that it was a new chapter in October of 2002. That is, in fact, quite accurate, and would also indicate that whoever put those docs together knew the inner workings of that organization as well as a lot of other things. So, the Las Vegas chapter and how they need speakers to help raise money and membership. Of course, that's quite accurate. Stalter, now this is the sentence I have some issue with, and I think needs clarification. Stalter believes if the Wilson Davis document is real, Wilson would have been a speaker there. So he got a quote from John Alexander. Actually, Chant got that quote from Alexander, but that's okay. Wilson would have been a speaker there. I wouldn't say it, but I wouldn't put it that way. What I believe is if and I went back and I did the research into the newsletters of AFIO, where they list the goings-on at different chapters around the country. And in October 2002, in fact, the AFIO chapter in Las Vegas had its very first meetings. What I believe is that if Wilson had been there, that would have been recorded. And we would have had some proof that Wilson was in Vegas, at least in roughly the time frame the notes are purported to have been taken. And what has actually happened, of course, Billy Cox was able to follow up a couple weeks back with Wilson himself, and Wilson gave a very broad, very specific denial where he talked about the mention of the aides ferrying him around, that he was retired at that point, that Navy personnel was not driving him from place to place. He was retired, so that didn't happen. And he also said very specifically, I have not been in Las Vegas since 1979, 1980. So again, let's say, for example, if he had made a statement like that, and we had it on record in the AFIO newsletter that he had made at least an appearance at this very first AFIO meeting, after being told all about how Rich and Doug were having some trouble or just going through some issues with getting the whole thing together, that would have put the lie to that, and that didn't happen. It also would have proven that Wilson was in the area in roughly the time frame. That, though, is proven not to be the case. So, and then but in the documents, Wilson was on, this is Joe's sort of rebuttal to that point, even though it's not exactly carefully represented or accurately represented. But in the documents, Wilson was on a tour, audit, and to say goodbye. We have no idea how long he may have been in Vegas. Would he have had time to lecture? And I'll take some issue with that a little bit too. Well, it does take some time to put together lectures, and there's no question that at these AFIO meetings, people do come in and give presentations and lectures and so on and so forth. But it's also a first meeting, and if Wilson's in town, for him to stop by and like at a store opening where you might bring in a celebrity to attract attention to your new store, it might have been something a little bit more than that, like that, if it had happened, which it didn't. But if it had, he doesn't necessarily have to do a lecture if he shows up. It could be, they've got some business to do, but he's there for a little informal meet and greet, shake a few hands, welcome to the AFIO chapter here in Vegas, maybe answer a few questions rather informally. So he's, I think, kind of misframing my point there. And then finally, Stalter says there's no evidence for Wilson being in Vegas, and as of right now, he's right. I am right about that. And again, there really has not been any evidence brought forth by the pro-dock people to back up these docks. Not evidence that the meeting took place. But of course, it doesn't change my opinion, and that's fine. Joe's entitled to his opinion. He believes what he wants. He likes his sources. He's categorized them at least, and I have no doubt that he's being honest about all that. But it doesn't. What he's saying about his sources doesn't change my opinion either. So what have we seen in the last week? We're also seeing Eric Davis and Hal Puthoff vouching for the veracity of a thoroughly debunked fake document, and that's not good on them. And I don't know specifically who his NID sources might be, but I have to say that we're still waiting for some evidence. But I do give the pro-doc people credit. I mean, they got knocked down pretty thoroughly by the Wilson denial. More information coming from Christian Lambright about some problems with those docs. But they take a licking and they keep on ticking. So I give them credit for that. And we'll see what happens. Again, in the recent past, maybe a couple months back, Ralph Blumenthal from the New York Times contacted Michael Hall, and they had a discussion about the docs, so there is some interest on that end. Leslie Keene, who has co-written New York Times stories with Blumenthal, has a track record of being interested in this specific case. She did write about it in the Boston Globe, at least about the original meeting back in the late 2000s, obviously before these notes came out, so she, as far as I know, hasn't addressed them in any form, but she did write about the original Wilson meeting with Mitchell and Greer, and she has in the past been involved heavily in FOIing information regarding the Kecksburg UFO case. Not sure what landed in Kecksburg, but I am quite convinced that it was a genuine crash retrieval case, and those are, of course, interested. What I'm looking at now, and there seems to be a lot of talk, and where there is smoke, there is some fire. We might be seeing a good bit more about crash retrievals coming up in the near future. And I've been looking closer at some that we know about and some that we know about regarding the UFO stuff, which doesn't really have they're not proved, let's put it that way, that what was retrieved was in some way, shape, or form extraterrestrial. But there are certainly some others. Again, I talked about it last time, this Project Azorian, the Glomar Explorer case, where, again, a Soviet sub sank in the Pacific, and we built a ship and basically went out there and picked it up off the ocean floor. A very fascinating case. The United States military and government will go to great lengths to recover foreign technology. So does some of that involve extraterrestrial technology? Well, we will see. Don't know about that. But that's about all I have time for. Running a little bit late tonight, and I'm going to let you go. Thanks for listening in, and we'll be back. I don't know if we're going to do anything over the 4th of July weekend, but the second season of Unidentified is going to be premiering on the 11th, so at the very least we'll have something the following day where we'll kind of give a quick and dirty review of all that. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. That's about all I've got for you, and have a good night. Bye-bye now.